These are 15 films from 1988 that lost Hollywood tens of millions of dollars. From passion projects by legendary directors to shameless cash grabs that audiences rejected outright, these box office disasters represent some of the biggest financial miscalculations of the decade. And this is what happened when studios bet big and lost everything. What might be the most obscure major budget failure in cinema history came out in November 1988. And if you've never heard of Hanna's War, you're certainly not alone. $139,796 at the box office. That's what this film earned. And that's not a typo. $20 million went into producing a movie that brought in less than $140,000 in theaters. The story centered on a World War II biographical drama based on Hanna Scenes, a Hungarian Jewish paratrooper considered Israel's Joan of Arc. Menahem Golan, the head of Cannon Films, considered this his masterwork and poured his passion into what he believed would define his legacy. Oscar winner Ellen Burstyn led the cast alongside Mariuszka Detmers, Anthony Andrews, Donald Pleasance, and David Warner, which should have been enough star power to draw audiences. Here's where it gets interesting, because Helena Bonham Carter originally had the role of Hanna with Peter Weir attached to direct, but both departed when production delays piled up and the project stalled. The film eventually premiered in Tel Aviv on April 14, 1988, timed to commemorate Israel's 40th anniversary, though that celebration wouldn't translate to American theaters. Why did it fail so spectacularly? Cannon Films had reached terminal condition by late 1988, facing an SEC investigation for allegedly fraudulent financial reporting and lacking the resources to afford wide distribution. Only 35 theaters ever played the film anywhere in the country. Variety offered some praise for the lead actress's dedicated and moving prison sequences, but criticized the lack of psychological depth, while the Los Angeles Times dismissed it as a trite and ponderous rendition. Pathé Communications took over Cannon in 1989, and Golan resigned that March before founding 21st Century Film Corporation. He continued producing lower-budget films until his passing on August 8, 2014, never achieving the artistic recognition he'd sought with this project. Hanna's War has never achieved cult status and remains one of cinema's most obscure major-budget failures. When your $20 million film earns less than 1% of its budget, you've created something historically terrible. Everything looked perfect on paper for Promised Land, which holds the distinction of being the first film ever commissioned by the Sundance Institute after being developed at Robert Redford's workshop back in 1984. Redford himself served as executive producer, and the cast featured rising young stars including Kiefer Sutherland, Meg Ryan, Jason Gedrick, and Tracy Pollan. $316,199 against a $3 million budget is what all that pedigree amounted to at the box office. Vestron Pictures released this small-town drama in January 1988, drawing its story from true events in Payette, Idaho. Director Michael Hoffman filmed across Nevada and Utah locations including Salt Lake City, Provo, and Wendover, capturing Reagan-era disillusionment through the lens of young people struggling to find meaning in small-town America. What's fascinating is the dramatic performance Meg Ryan delivered, described by critics as psychopathic and galvanizing and utterly unlike her later romantic comedy persona that would make her famous. Michael Wilmington of the Los Angeles Times called her work extraordinary, writing that she galvanizes the movie by whipping psychopathically between wounded tenderness and shrieking rage. Variety disagreed with that assessment entirely, feeling the film was drained of dramatic tension from start to finish. The real problem was Vestron's crumbling distribution infrastructure, because the company that had made a fortune on home video releases simply didn't have the resources or expertise to market a theatrical film properly. Marketing support was virtually non-existent, and the film's bleak examination of disillusionment found few takers during its brief theatrical run. Strong reviews couldn't save Promised Land from vanishing within weeks of opening on just 6 screens with no expansion to follow. Both Meg Ryan and Kiefer Sutherland would become major stars within just a few years, making this an interesting footnote in careers that hadn't yet ignited. Sundance pedigree and future star power sometimes can't save a film from distribution neglect, and Promised Land learned that lesson the hard way. Roger Vadim created a sensation back in 1956 with And God Created Woman, launching Brigitte Bardot to international stardom while helping liberalize cinema's treatment of female sensuality. 32 years later came his attempt to recapture that lightning by remaking his own classic, and the result earned just $717,376 against a $5 to $6 million budget. March 1988 brought this remake to theaters through Vestron Pictures, starring Rebecca De Mornay, Vincent Spano, and Frank Langella, in what promised to be an updated take on provocative filmmaking. Here's the thing though, the American update shared virtually nothing with the French original except the provocative title, telling a completely different story set in the American Southwest rather than recreating what made the first film iconic. Warner Brothers had initially shown interest in the project, with Madonna considered for the lead role and Marlon Brando discussed for a supporting part. Both passed on the opportunity, and when major stars start backing away from a project, that's usually a warning sign that something isn't working. Rebecca De Mornay took the lead after those departures, but critics found the film directionless and without the spark its title promised. Vestron had staked their first in-house production on this remake, and its failure signaled serious trouble coming for the studio's theatrical ambitions. De Mornay received a Worst Actress Golden Raspberry nomination, and the failure set back her career significantly until her comeback in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle 4 years later in 1992. Roger Vadim would never direct another theatrical film after this disappointment, working only in television before his passing in 2000. Lightning sometimes only strikes once, and Vadim's attempt to recreate his greatest success with the same title, but none of the same magic, proved that invoking a name doesn't mean you can repeat history. The original and God-created woman changed cinema forever, while the remake barely registered as a footnote that most people have never seen. Two of the hottest young actors of the late 80s headlined Kansas, with Matt Dillon and Andrew McCarthy bringing their star power to a crime drama that premiered at the 1988 Cannes Film Festival. $2.3 million against an $8 million budget is what that star power generated, landing the film an 18% score on Rotten Tomatoes from 11 reviews. Transworld Entertainment released this crime drama in September 1988, following a drifter and a criminal crossing paths in small-town Kansas with consequences neither expected. Leslie Hope and Kira Sedgwick rounded out the cast, meaning 4 actors who would have significant careers appeared in a film that history has largely forgotten entirely. Here's a telling detail that explains a lot about what went wrong, because screenwriter Spencer Eastman had never actually been to Kansas when he wrote the script, and critics noticed the disconnect immediately. Roger Ebert delivered a withering assessment, calling it a screenplay written and filmed by people who must think nobody in the audience has ever seen a movie before. Other critics complained that small-town Kansans were treated like idiot rubes throughout the entire runtime. Predictable melodrama and forced romanticism doomed Kansas with audiences and reviewers alike, while Transworld Entertainment's status as a small distributor meant they lacked the resources to market the film properly and give it a fighting chance. When your Cannes premiere generates more yawns than buzz, you know you're in trouble before the film even reaches American theaters. Matt Dillon, Andrew McCarthy, Leslie Hope, and Kira Sedgwick all moved on to better things that actually advanced their careers. This film became a footnote nobody discusses, because sometimes a movie just disappears from cultural memory entirely, and Kansas disappeared completely without leaving a trace. A strange phenomenon emerged in 1988 when 4 different body swap comedies competed for audiences at the same time. Big starred Tom Hanks, Vice Versa featured Judge Reinhold, Like Father Like Son paired Dudley Moore with Kirk Cameron, and 18 Again showcased George Burns in what would become his final leading film role. Only Big succeeded with its $151 million and an Oscar nomination for Hanks, while 18 Again earned just $2,567,000. New World Pictures released this comedy in April 1988, featuring the 92-year-old comedy legend as a grandfather who magically swaps bodies with his teenage grandson, played by Charlie Schlatter. Tony Roberts, Red Buttons, and a young Pauly Shore filled out the supporting cast in what should have been a showcase for Burns' legendary timing. The premise came from Burns' song, I Wish I Was 18 Again, which sounds like a charming idea for a film built around his persona. The problem was that the body swap setup required Burns to spend most of the movie in a coma or as a voiceover, and audiences who came specifically to see the legendary comedian found themselves disappointed by his barely present screen time. Roger Ebert gave it 1.5 out of 4 stars, writing that the whole project seems to have been enveloped in a miasma of good intentions and heartwarming sentiments without any edge or bite to make it memorable. Janet Maslin criticized the decision to leave George Burns comatose for most of the runtime, pointing out the obvious flaw in the concept. Critics compared it unfavorably even to Vice Versa, which Ebert called the best of the three by far, though even that film underperformed expectations. When you have a comedy legend like George Burns and you put him in a coma for most of your movie, you've fundamentally misunderstood why people bought tickets in the first place. The body swap wars of 1988 had only one winner, and it wasn't this one that wasted its greatest asset. Cyndi Lauper chose Vibes as her film debut at the height of her pop stardom, picking this project specifically to avoid playing what she called a typical airhead version of what Hollywood thinks a woman is. $18 million went into this supernatural adventure comedy, and just $1,883,000 came back, making it one of 1988's biggest financial disasters by percentage lost. Columbia Pictures released Vibes in August, with Lauper starring alongside Jeff Goldblum and Peter Falk in a story about two psychics recruited to find a mysterious power source in the Andes Mountains. James Horner composed the score, and on paper, everything about this project should have worked for audiences hungry for adventure comedy. The production history reveals where the problem started, because Dan Aykroyd was originally cast opposite Lauper, but dropped out after creative disagreements over approach and tone. Lauper's memoir explains that Aykroyd felt uneasy with her intuitive acting style, asking repeatedly how she planned to portray certain scenes. Columbia stood by Lauper and replaced him with Jeff Goldblum, while Ron Howard departed from his attached director role, leaving Ken Kwapis to take over with Howard remaining as producer. Lauper's 2012 memoir revealed she and Goldblum did not get along during production, with her writing that he was really awful and a strange fellow while describing uncomfortable experiences filming together. Roger Ebert gave it 1 out of 4 stars, writing that movies like Vibes appear and disappear like fireflies in the dog days of summer because nobody seems to have made them, nobody sees them, and nobody remembers them afterward. On Lauper specifically, he wrote that she has not found her way into a character for the movie and essentially stands around being herself rather than acting. TV Tropes describes this as a star-derailing role, and Lauper later wrote that Vibes really hurt her career significantly. She eventually pivoted away from film entirely, winning a Tony Award in 2013 for composing Kinky Boots on Broadway. Director Ken Kwapis saw his career similarly affected, with the failure putting what TV Tropes calls a B-list handicap on his trajectory right away. Mill Creek Entertainment released Vibes on Blu-ray in 2020 for its minor cult following, but the film's main legacy remains as a cautionary tale about pop stars trying to transition to acting. Take the classic play, The Front Page, update it to the world of cable news, cast Kathleen Turner, Burt Reynolds, and Christopher Reeve, and you get switching channels. The fourth screen adaptation of that material, and by far the least successful version ever made. $18 million in production costs returned just $9,129,000 from audiences. TriStar Pictures released this romantic comedy in March 1988, with Ted Kotcheff directing and Ned Beatty and Henry Gibson supporting the leads. The story transplanted the classic newspaper comedy to the world of 24-hour news networks, trying to modernize material that had already worked multiple times before. Critics described the result as the fourth and least successful movie version of the source material, and Jonathan Rosenbaum simply called it incoherence without elaborating further. The real story here happened behind the scenes because the production became notorious for harsh infighting between Reynolds and Turner during filming. Reynolds later said his advice to his younger self would be simple: don't work with Kathleen Turner. On Watch What Happens Live in 2018, Reynolds called Turner the most overrated actor in the 70s and 80s, suggesting the animosity never faded with time. When your two leads apparently can't stand each other, that tension tends to show on screen and audiences pick up on it immediately. Roger Ebert gave it a relatively favorable review, but audiences stayed away regardless of what critics said. The chemistry simply wasn't there between Turner and Reynolds, and viewers could tell something was wrong without knowing the details. Switching channels demonstrated that even a classic premise and major stars couldn't guarantee success because you need chemistry between your leads. You need a coherent vision behind the camera, and you need your actors to actually want to work together. By most accounts, this production had none of those things working in its favor. Dan Aykroyd starred in The Couch Trip as a con artist who escapes from a psychiatric facility and poses as a radio psychiatrist in Los Angeles. a premise that should have generated plenty of comedy from a performer at his level. $19 million went into making this film, and just $11 million came back, losing approximately $8 million before marketing costs even entered the equation. Orion Pictures released this comedy in January 1988 with Michael Ritchie directing and Walter Matthau, Charles Grodin, and Donna Dixon co-starring alongside Aykroyd. The story came from a 1971 novel by Ken Kolb, and Chevy Chase makes a brief cameo that hints at what the film could have been with different casting choices throughout. This was part of Dan Aykroyd's brutal 1988, a year where he appeared in 4 commercial disappointments back-to-back: The Couch Trip, Caddyshack II, The Great Outdoors, and My Stepmother is an Alien. Critics noted the film had no comic chemistry whatsoever between its talented cast members, wasting the potential of putting Aykroyd with Matthau and Grodin. Roger Ebert called it a disappointment and a missed opportunity, giving it 2.5 out of 4 stars, while criticizing the mindless and meaningless action sequence ending that felt tacked on. The Los Angeles Times described the film as depressed in tone, which is not exactly what you want audiences saying about a comedy. Over 1,300 theaters showed the film during its opening, but momentum never built despite the star power assembled. Aykroyd, Matthau, and Grodin together should have drawn audiences, but interest simply wasn't there for what they were selling. Today, The Couch Trip is considered an overlooked Orion Pictures title, gathering dust in the MGM vault without any significant home video reissue or cult reappraisal. Some films become cult classics over time, while others just disappear from memory, and The Couch Trip disappeared completely. Something that doesn't happen often in Hollywood occurred with The Blob from 1988, a remake that's actually better than the original it reimagined. The 1958 Steve McQueen classic now sits below this version in critical estimation, with the remake currently holding a 92% score on Rotten Tomatoes. None of that praise translated to ticket sales though, because the film earned only $8,247,000 against a reported budget of $10 to $20 million. TriStar Pictures released this sci-fi horror remake in August 1988 with Chuck Russell directing and co-writing alongside Frank Darabont, who would later write and direct The Shawshank Redemption and prove his talent wasn't a fluke. Kevin Dillon, Shawnee Smith, and Donovan Leitch led the cast through an updated story that added conspiracy thriller elements to the original creature feature premise. Special effects supervisor Tony Gardner led a 33-person team using silk bags filled with methyl cellulose to create the creature, taking over after the original effects had departed due to creative differences over how the monster should look and move. Filming took place in Abbeville, Louisiana, beginning January 11, 1988, giving the production a distinctive southern atmosphere. The budget remains disputed to this day, with Russell claiming it was $10 million or less, while Daily Variety reported nearly $20 million at the time of production. Either way, Screen International called the domestic performance disastrous when the final numbers came in. Russell later reflected that maybe it was a mistake to do a remake of The Blob with a sense of humor baked into the horror. The film released late in a crowded summer and suffered from poor marketing that failed to distinguish it from other genre offerings competing for attention. Here's the twist though, because The Blob has been completely rehabilitated by horror fans and critics in the decades since. That 92% Rotten Tomatoes score reflects widespread consensus that it's a rare remake superior to the original material it adapted. Scream Factory released a collector's Blu-ray in 2019, followed by a 4K UHD edition in 2023 for enthusiasts who wanted the best possible presentation. Sometimes a film finds its audience decades later, and The Blob was simply ahead of its time when it needed to find viewers opening weekend. High Spirits offers a fascinating case of what happens when a studio destroys a director's vision through interference and meddling. Neil Jordan arrived at this project riding critical acclaim from Mona Lisa in 1986, creating a supernatural comedy about a cash-strapped Irish aristocrat who converts his ancestral castle into a haunted tourist attraction only to discover it's actually haunted by real ghosts. $15 to $17 million produced a film that earned just $8,578,000 at the box office. TriStar Pictures released the film in November 1988 with an impressive cast that included Peter O'Toole, Daryl Hannah, Steve Guttenberg, Beverly D'Angelo, Liam Neeson, Jennifer Tilly, and Peter Gallagher, assembled for what should have been a winning combination. Sean Connery was originally attached as the star, but dropped out before filming began in November 1987 at Dromore Castle in County Limerick, Ireland. Here's what happened to turn this promising project into a disappointment. Jordan was locked out of the editing room after the studio saw his original cut and decided they wanted something different. In a 1990 New York Times interview, Jordan stated the producers did not allow him to be involved with the final edit of the film, transforming a biting satire into a bland comedy that betrayed his intentions entirely. Jordan insists his original version remains locked away in a vault and is very different from the one audiences saw in theaters. A shortened version of his cut allegedly saw limited video release in Japan, suggesting an alternate version exists somewhere. The comparison to Beetlejuice is damning when you look at the numbers side by side. Both were supernatural comedies about haunted residences released in 1988. But Beetlejuice cost $15 million and earned $75 to $84 million with an 83% Rotten Tomatoes score. Beetlejuice won an Oscar and inspired a Broadway musical, while High Spirits has been largely forgotten by everyone except Jordan himself. Jordan went on to win an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay for The Crying Game in 1992, followed by Interview with the Vampire and Michael Collins proving his talents when given creative control. He has consistently distanced himself from the released version of High Spirits, and we'll never know what his original vision looked like without studio interference changing everything. April 1988 brought Sunset to theaters, just months before a movie called Die Hard would make Bruce Willis a superstar and change his career trajectory forever. This mystery western hybrid cost $16 to $19 million and earned just $4,594,000, winning Blake Edwards a Razzie for Worst Director along the way. TriStar Pictures distributed the film with Willis in his second Blake Edwards project after Blind Date in 1987, playing silent film star Tom Mix in a fictional story imagining Mix meeting the real Wyatt Earp in 1920s Hollywood during the first Academy Awards. James Garner portrayed Earp, with Malcolm McDowell, Mariel Hemingway, and Kathleen Quinlan rounding out the cast in supporting roles. Some historical basis exists for the premise because Earp did live in Los Angeles and knew Tom Mix personally. Both Mix and William S. Hart served as pallbearers at Earp's 1929 funeral, so the idea of them spending time together wasn't entirely invented. Edwards counseled Willis that he couldn't rely on the jokes and the leer from moonlighting if he wanted to be taken seriously as a film actor. The production turned troubled quickly, with James Garner reportedly vowing never to work with Willis again after filming wrapped. In a 1994 Movie Line interview, Garner stated that Willis is high school, not that serious about his work, thinking he's so clever he can just walk through it and make up dialogue and stuff. Garner added that he doesn't think you work that way if you want quality results. Leonard Maltin called it an appalling piece of junk, unpleasant and unbelievable from the word go, adding that Willis registers 0 playing one of the Western genre's most magnetic stars and that only Garner's charisma saves this wreckage from total collapse. Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote that it's a plot that unravels on its own without characters, without anything, not even a point of view, describing it simply as a zombie of a film. Edwards won a Razzie for Worst Director, tied with Stuart Raffle for Mac and Me, while Mariel Hemingway received a nomination for Worst Supporting Actress. Strangely, the film also received an Oscar nomination for Best Costume Design, proving that sometimes a film can look great and still be terrible in every other way that matters. Tucker, The Man in His Dream, represents one of the great what-ifs of 1980s cinema, a passion project that earned critical praise and 3 Oscar nominations while still losing money at the box office. Francis Ford Coppola's film about automotive innovator Preston Tucker cost $24 million and earned just $19,650,000, despite everything working in its favor artistically. Paramount Pictures released the film in August 1988, with Jeff Bridges starring as Tucker alongside Martin Landau, Joan Allen, Christian Slater, and Dean Stockwell in supporting roles that showcased serious acting talent. Vittorio Storaro handled cinematography, while Joe Jackson composed the Grammy-nominated score, giving the film a visual and audio polish that matched Coppola's ambitions. Coppola first announced intention to make a Tucker film back in 1973, with Marlon Brando in the lead role, then planned an ambitious experimental musical version in 1976, with Leonard Bernstein composing and Betty Comden and Adolph Green writing lyrics. That vision collapsed when American Zoetrope faced bankruptcy after One from the Heart in 1982. shelving the project for years. The project's personal significance ran deep for Coppola because his father, Carmine Coppola, was an original Tucker stock investor who purchased a Tucker car off the production line when the company still existed. Critics widely noted the parallel between Tucker's struggle against the big three automakers and Coppola's own battles with major studios throughout his career. George Lucas believed Tucker was the best film Francis had ever been involved with and backed that belief with his checkbook. When studios demanded the budget be cut from $24 million to $15 million, Lucas personally funded the entire $24 million budget to keep Coppola's vision intact. After production wrapped, Lucas leveraged Paramount's desire for Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade to convince them to distribute Tucker as part of the deal. Coppola told the New York Times in July 1988 that he thinks it's a good movie, eccentric, and a little wacky, like the Tucker car itself, but not the movie he would have made at the height of his power when studios gave him whatever he wanted. Martin Landau won a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor and received an Oscar nomination for his work, while the film won a BAFTA for Best Production Design, recognizing the period detail. Jeff Bridges wore Tucker's actual black pearl ring and cufflinks during filming after studying the family's home movies to capture authentic details. Tucker has been reappraised as a minor masterpiece in the years since, and interest in the film sparked a significant increase in Tucker automobile auction prices, with a low-mileage Tucker 48 topping $1 million at a 2008 auction. Commercial failure and artistic success can coexist, and Tucker proves that sometimes the numbers don't tell the whole story. Arthur II, On the Rocks, answered a question nobody was asking. What happened to that lovable, wealthy character from 1981 who charmed audiences with his lifestyle? $20 million went into this sequel that earned just $14.7 million, a far cry from the original's $95.5 million gross on a $7 million budget that made the first film a phenomenon. Warner Brothers released this sequel in July 1988, reuniting Dudley Moore, who also served as executive producer, with Liza Minnelli for another round of romantic comedy. John Gielgud returned as a ghost or vision of his beloved butler character Hobson, and Geraldine Fitzgerald also appeared while Bud Yorkin handled directing duties. The original Arthur ranked as the fourth highest grossing film of 1981, winning 2 Oscars for John Gielgud's Best Supporting Actor performance and Arthur's theme as Best Original Song. Writer-director Steve Gordon had passed in November 1982, complicating any sequel plans since his voice and vision defined what made the original work. Warner Brothers acquired sequel rights through an unusual trade, giving Orion permission to use Hitchcock's Strangers on a train clips in Throw Mama from the Train in 1987 in exchange for Arthur's sequel rights. The studio wanted this property badly enough to make deals. Critics complained the darker tone dealing with sobriety, poverty, and infertility clashed with the original's carefree spirit that audiences loved. The premise forced Arthur to become responsible, eliminating his endearing charm and the behavior that made him funny. Sheila Benson's Los Angeles Times review was brutal, writing that the excruciating Arthur II on the Rocks should come with a Surgeon General's warning that this sort of stupidity may sap your will to live or to watch movies ever again. Time Out called it as funny as a cerebral hemorrhage, which is about as harsh as criticism gets. Liza Minnelli won Worst Actress at the Golden Raspberry Awards, shared with her role in Rent-A-Cop that same year. Moore had expressed optimism about the project before release, believing the new direction would work for audiences. He eventually disowned the film entirely, and his comedy partner Peter Cook would later tease him by claiming he preferred Arthur II to the original just to get a reaction. Some sequels never should have been made, and this one proved that rule. Hollywood's textbook example of how not to make a sequel arrived in July 1988 under the title Caddyshack II. $25 million in budget, with virtually none of the original cast, produced just $11,798,000 at the box office, earning a 4% score on Rotten Tomatoes from 24 reviews that still stands as one of the lowest for any major studio comedy. Warner Brothers released this disaster with Alan Arkush directing a script by Harold Ramis and PJ Torokvei, the same Ramis who helped create the original. Jackie Mason took the lead role meant for someone else, with Diane Cannon, Robert Stack, Dan Aykroyd, and a brief Chevy Chase cameo filling out a cast that never gelled together. Why didn't the original cast return? Rodney Dangerfield made only $35,000 for the original despite becoming the film's breakout star. For the sequel, he demanded $7 million with $5 million upfront, plus a personal sauna on set as a perk. Warner Brothers agreed to everything, but Dangerfield grew disillusioned with the script they gave him. In October 1987, less than a month before filming, he dropped out after reportedly throwing the script in the trash. Warner Brothers sued him for $10 million in damages, later settling for an undisclosed amount. Bill Murray wasn't interested from the start, especially after learning the sequel would be rated PG instead of R and would lack the adult edge that made the original memorable. He chose to make Scrooged instead, later reflecting that Caddyshack was a great thing and asking why people can't just be happy with having seen it and watched it rather than wanting it again. Ted Knight had passed in 1986, removing another original element. After Dangerfield left, producer John Peters flew to New York to see Jackie Mason's one-man Broadway show as a potential replacement. Director Arkush had concerns immediately, noting that Mason didn't connect with the audience in any sort of personal way during his performance. Arkush brought those concerns to Peters, who replied with "Don't turn a Go picture into a development deal, prioritizing momentum over quality." On set, Mason couldn't remember his lines, had a poor golf swing despite working with a pro, and overate at craft services, forcing constant wardrobe alterations throughout production. Chevy Chase was paid a seven-figure sum for approximately 5 minutes of screen time, and during post-production, he told Arkush to call him when they dubbed the laugh track before walking off in disgust at what he saw. Harold Ramis later called his own script terrible, regretting his involvement entirely. After attending an early screening in Pasadena, Ramis and his co-writer literally crawled out of the theater because they didn't want anyone to see them associated with what they'd created. Ramis tried to remove his name from the credits, but the studio refused, saying it would hurt the film's marketability. The Washington Post called it lamer than a duck with bunions and dumber than grubs, while the Los Angeles Times said it makes Caddyshack I look like Godfather II by comparison. Dan Aykroyd won a Razzie for Worst Supporting Actor, and the film also won for Worst Original Song. Director Arkush later said making the film sent him into therapy and that you should never make a movie for the wrong reasons, no matter what they're paying you. The most infamous box office disaster of 1988 arrived in August under the title Mac and Me, possibly one of the most shameless cash grabs in cinema history that somehow became a cultural phenomenon for all the wrong reasons. $13 million produced a film that earned just $6,424,000. But its legacy extends far beyond that financial failure into something stranger. Orion Pictures released this E.T. ripoff with Stuart Raffill directing a cast that included Christine Ebersole, Jonathan Ward, and Jade Caligari, plus Ronald McDonald as himself in what marked the motion picture debut of that corporate mascot character played by Squire Friedel. Raffill was hired out of the blue on James Brolin's recommendation, arriving at the production office to discover a fully assembled crew already on payroll but no script waiting for him. Raffill recalled the producer saying they didn't have a script and he'd have to write it quickly while prepping the movie on weekends, creating the story on the fly. The film became legendary for its brazen commercialism that shocked even cynical Hollywood observers. The aliens are literally revived from near peril by drinking Coca-Cola in one of cinema's most blatant product placements ever filmed. A 4-minute dance sequence was shot at a McDonald's restaurant built specifically for production purposes, turning the film into an extended commercial with a thin plot wrapped around the advertisements. Gene Siskel gave it 1.5 stars, writing that this is what happens when someone doesn't make a sequel to a hit movie fast enough because someone else with a lot of brass makes a ripoff that is even less satisfying than Waiting would have been. Michael Wilmington of the Los Angeles Times called it an amazingly bald-faced copy of E.T., even though this is E.T. in a sticky wrapper left under the heater 2 hours too long. Richard Harrington of the Washington Post amended the famous phrase to E.T., "Call lawyer." Morgan Spurlock, director of Super Size Me, called it the most egregious example of product placement in cinema history and the worst thing you'll ever see in your entire life. 2 Razzies went to Mac and Me. Worst Director for Raffill, tied with Blake Edwards, and Worst New Star for Ronald McDonald in his feature film debut. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn though. On February 6, 2004, Paul Rudd appeared on Late Night with Conan O'Brien to promote the Friends series finale and was asked if he had an exclusive clip to show the audience. Rudd instead played the infamous wheelchair cliff scene from Mac and Me, and that gag has continued for over 20 years across Late Night, Conan on TBS, the podcast, and even the 2025 Mark Twain Prize ceremony. Rudd explained that actors are always saying they brought a clip when that's not really true, and he found something tricky about selling his wares on TV, calling it kind of insincere to pretend enthusiasm for promotional clips. He originally considered using a clip from Baby Geniuses instead, before settling on Mac and Me as his signature joke. Mystery Science Theater 3000 featured the film in Season 12, Episode 1 in November 2018, cementing its reputation as a beloved bad movie for audiences who enjoy that kind of entertainment. Shout Factory released a collector's edition Blu-ray in 2018 for fans who wanted to own this disaster. The film ends with text reading, "We'll be back," but the sequel never happened despite that promise. Lead actor Jade Caligari, who has spina bifida and uses a wheelchair in real life, has spoken positively about his experience making the film. Today, he lives in Arizona working as a photographer, videographer, and marketing director, having moved on to a successful life beyond Hollywood. He has said you shouldn't dwell on what you can't do, but focus on what you can do, and the more you see what you can do, the more you come to realize there are no limitations in life. Looking back at 1988's box office disasters reveals several patterns that explain why so much money vanished that year. The independent studio collapse claimed multiple victims, with Canon Films, Vestron, and others facing bankruptcy or severe financial distress that left their theatrical releases without marketing and distribution support. Dan Aykroyd appeared in 4 commercial disappointments that year alone, suggesting even reliable stars couldn't guarantee returns anymore. Genre oversaturation of body swap comedies and ghost comedies meant only the standouts succeeded, while similar films cannibalized each other's audiences. Unnecessary sequels like Arthur II and Caddyshack II proved audiences weren't automatically interested in follow-ups to beloved films when the magic was missing. $130 million in combined losses from these 15 films represents what studios lost before marketing costs, which typically added 50% to production budgets in 1988. Some hope emerged from these failures, though. The Blob has been completely rehabilitated as a cult classic that horror fans now celebrate. Tucker is considered a minor masterpiece that found its audience through home video and critical reappraisal. Even Mac and Me found immortality through Paul Rudd's 20-year running joke that introduced the film to new generations who'd never heard of it otherwise. A film's legacy sometimes has nothing to do with its opening weekend numbers. The studios that greenlit these disasters learned expensive lessons about star vehicles without scripts, sequels without original talent, and passion projects without audiences willing to pay for them. Some of those lessons stuck and influenced future decisions, though many didn't change anything about how Hollywood operates. These 15 films represent over 130 million reasons why Hollywood remains the riskiest business in entertainment. For every Rain Man or Die Hard that year, there were dozens of failures like Hanna's War and Caddyshack II bleeding money. That's the gamble, that's the dream, and that's why we keep watching even when the results are disasters that teach us what not to do.